Hi everyone, today I will be talking a little bit about the topic elasticities from the IB economics course. So without further ado, we can get started. So what does elasticities mean? First of all, elasticity is an economic concept that refers to the responsiveness among consumers or producers to a change in a variable that affects either market demand or supply. And we have three types of elasticity, so we can get started with the first one, which is the price elasticity of demand, also known as PED. So what does PED measure? PED measures the responsiveness of consumers of a particular good to a change in its price. So we can also say that PED is QD, so quantity demanded versus price. And it measures how much quantity demanded changes as a result of changes in price. So what happens to quantity demanded if, let's say, good A's price increases. We can calculate PED by dividing percentage change in quantity demanded by percentage change in price, which can also be calculated as subtracting the initial quantity demanded from the final quantity demanded and dividing it again by the initial and doing the same thing with price and then dividing each other. No matter what the quantity demanded or the price is, PED will always have a negative value. And this is because of the law of demand. And the law of demand states that price and quantity always have an inverse relation, which is why PED always has a negative value. And since it always will be negative, we just refer to it in its absolute value. So let's say the PED of a good is negative 0.4. We can just say that its PED is 0.4 by taking its absolute value, just to clear the confusion. Here's a table that kind of summarizes the values of PED and what they mean. We have two frequently encountered cases, which are when PED is between 0 and 1, and when PED is between 1 and it will go to infinity. When PED is between 0 and 1, we refer to it as price inelastic demand. So quantity demanded is relatively unresponsive to changes in price. And on the contrary, we have price elastic demand, which is the case for PED values bigger than 1. And it means that quantity demanded is relatively responsive to price. So these are opposite cases of each other. And inelastic goods can be like goods like cigarettes, so goods that are relatively unresponsive to price. And I will give more examples of elastic goods moving on. And we have three special cases. They are when PED is equal to 1, we call it unit elastic demand. When it's equal to 0, we call it perfectly inelastic demand. And when it equals infinity, we call it as perfectly elastic demand. And you can see the explanations of those in here as well. So what are the determinants and the applications of PED? There's a kind of like little tip to memorize the determinants of PED, and we can do so by memorizing the word splat. So the S refers to substitutes, and the number of substitutes of a good available affects its demand. So the more substitutes there are, the more elastic demand is, because consumers can't switch products with ease because there are many substitutes. And like vice versa, the same thing happens when a good does not have substitutes, but it makes the good more inelastic. So P refers to the proportion of income. The proportion of income the purchase of a good represents. So if a good represents a higher proportion of consumers' income, it's more elastic because the consumer will put more time and thinking to the process of purchasing that particular good, since it will have a higher proportion of the income. So it's easier to give up buying goods that are more elastic. The L is for luxury or necessity. So goods can be divided into two, so luxuries and necessities. If a good is a necessity, the changes in P tend to not affect quantity demanded, so the demand of necessity goods are inelastic. So like water or food supplies are inelastic goods, and no matter how the price of those change, consumers will always keep buying them. And if a good is a luxury, consumers can go without those goods, or consumers tend to be more responsive with that. So luxury goods, let's say a designer bag is a luxury good, and if the price of it is way too high for you, you can actually give up buying that good, which is not the case with necessity goods. A is for addictiveness, and like I said, for instance, smoking is a big and it's a great example of inelastic goods, because if a good is addictive or it's habit forming, demand tends to be inelastic. So like I said, no matter how the price of an inelastic good changes, the demand will always stay relatively the same. And T is for time lastly, and time is the amount of time a consumer has to respond to the price change. So if prices remain high over a long period of time, consumers can't find substitutes or learn to live without purchasing that particular good, so demand is more elastic when time passes by. These were the determinants of PED, and like I said, you can memorize them by using the splat. And we have 3 applications of PED. The first one is the pricing decisions of businesses and the government. So businesses benefit from knowing how responsive their consumers are to price changes at any given time. And this is more so the case when businesses are trying to set a price for their good to make profit. They look at how responsive the good is to changes in price. In the pricing decisions of the government needs to know how consumers will respond to taxes imposed on particular goods, because the government would want to generate revenue from indirect taxes, as you can see. So they impose indirect taxes often on inelastic goods, since they will earn more revenue from them. And one of the applications of PED is also total revenue, which can be calculated by multiplying price and quantity. And by looking at how a change in price causes total revenues to change, we can determine whether demand is inelastic or elastic between 2 prices. So what do I mean by that? You can see the cases in here. So price and quantity have a relationship with total revenue. And these are the cases. So what happens to, how can we comment on demand by comparing how price and total revenue change? So looking at the graphs of PED, we have 5 graphs. These are frequently encountered cases, and these ones are specially encountered cases. So you won't see these that often, but it's good to keep in mind always. The frequent cases are price inelastic and elastic demand. So inelastic demanded goods will always have a more steep demand curve, as you can see, compared to price elastic demands in here. And these cases have their graphs, which you can see in here also, and it's always good to keep them in mind. Our second elasticity is the price elasticity of supply, also known as PES. And it measures the responsiveness of producers, since it's about supply, to price changes. So PES is also quantity supplied versus price. And the formula of PES is percentage change in quantity supplied over percentage change in price. And it will always have a positive value, unlike PED. And like I said, since PES is about supply, it will be about producers also. And PED was about demand, so it was about consumers. And there's a table in here also explaining the same cases with PED, so you can see those classifications and interpretations in here. And the same thing occurs with PED in here as well. So the determinants and applications of PES are time spent on production, mobility of resources, excess or spare capacity, and the ability to store stocks, also rate at which costs increase. And we have the applications, which are primary commodities and manufactured goods. So the PES of primary commodities will be less than the PES of manufactured goods. And also firms' pricing decisions, like I explained it earlier, and also what to produce. And the graphs of PES are like so. These are the frequent cases, and the ones below are the special ones. And the frequent cases, the same thing with PED is also applicable for PES. So inelastic supply has a more steeper graph than the elastic supply, and these are all relative terms. Our last elasticity is the income elasticity of demand, also known as YED. YED measures the responsiveness of demand to changes in income, so it's income versus quantity demanded. It can be calculated by dividing percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in income. YED has 2 special cases, so it can be divided into 2 by looking at normal versus inferior goods and dividing normal goods into 2 as well. So if YED has a positive value, it indicates that the good in the question is a normal good. And normal good and inferior goods are kind of like the opposite. So the demand for the good and income change are in the same direction in the case of normal goods. And in the case of inferior goods, they are in the opposite direction, so they have an inverse relationship. And for example, bus rides, second-hand cars are all inferior goods. So as incomes decrease, the demand for inferior goods increases. And normal goods can be divided into 2 by necessities and luxuries, and I explained them earlier as well. When YED is between 0 and 1, those goods are referred to as necessity goods. And when YED is bigger than 1, they are luxury goods. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I think elasticity is a very important topic, so you can study further apart from the video as well. Thanks. Bye.